The thunder of hooves against the dry Montana earth was the only warning Pearl Shaw had before the stranger appeared at her door, blood seeping through his tattered shirt and desperation in his eyes. Montana Territory, 1878, a land of opportunity and danger in equal measure, where Pearl had sought refuge from a past that haunted her every waking moment. "Help me," the man rasped, swaying on his feet. His tall frame crumpled against her doorframe, revealing a bullet wound in his side. Pearl's instinct was to slam the door, to protect the sanctuary she'd built, but something in his piercing blue eyes stopped her. Not the pain, though there was plenty of that, but a kindness that seemed out of place in a man who wore a gun belt with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. "I don't bring trouble to your door willingly, madam," he managed before his knees buckled. Pearl caught him with surprising strength for her slender frame. At 24, she'd learned to fend for herself in this unforgiving territory. "I've got you," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was helping this stranger rather than leaving him to whatever fate had marked him for. She managed to drag him inside her modest cabin, where she'd lived alone since arriving in White Rock 2 years prior. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, yet somehow Pearl had maintained her privacy, keeping others at arm's length. After settling him on her bed, Pearl worked efficiently to remove his shirt and examine the wound. The bullet had torn through his side but hadn't hit anything vital from what she could tell. She cleaned the wound with whiskey from her limited stores, causing him to jerk awake with a curse. "Sorry," she muttered, not sounding particularly apologetic. "Bullets gone clean through, at least." His eyes found hers clear despite the pain. "Much obliged, madam. Name's Mason Knox. Pearl Shaw," she replied tersely, "and you can save your story for when you're not bleeding on my quilt." He attempted a smile that transformed his rugged face. "Fair enough." Pearl worked methodically, stitching his wound with practiced hands that spoke of previous experience with such injuries. When she finished, she covered him with a blanket and stood to wash her hands in the basin. "You've done this before," Mason observed, his voice stronger now. "My father was a doctor during the war," she explained, offering nothing more. "And you, what brings a woman alone to White Rock?" Pearl's expression shuddered. "Rest now, Mr. Knox. Questions can wait until morning." Morning came with golden light filtering through the simple cotton curtains. Pearl had spent the night in her rocking chair, dozing fitfully, one hand never far from the small pistol she kept for protection. She woke to find Mason watching her, his color much improved. "You stayed up all night," he said. It wasn't a question. Pearl stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'm not in the habit of sleeping while strange men occupy my home. Wise policy." Mason attempted to sit up, wincing but managing it better than she expected. "I owe you an explanation." Pearl poured coffee from the pot she'd set on the stove earlier. "I reckon you do." "I'm tracking men who robbed the Billings Bank 2 weeks back. They shot the teller, a boy of 17. His jaw tightened. "I'm a federal marshal." Pearl's hand stilled momentarily before she handed him the coffee. "And they shot you for your troubles. Ambushed me about 10 miles east of here. I managed to get away, but they'll be looking." His eyes met hers. "I won't stay long enough to bring danger to your door. Too late for that," Pearl replied dryly, "but I appreciate the sentiment." Over the next few days, Pearl found herself drawn to the marshal despite her better judgment. Mason recovered quickly, helping around the cabin when she allowed it, which wasn't often. He didn't push for information about her past, and she afforded him the same courtesy, focusing instead on the present. On the third evening, as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Mason broke their unspoken agreement. "What are you running from, Pearl Shaw?" She stiffened. "Who says I'm running?" A woman with medical knowledge living alone in a territory town, keeping to herself, startling at unexpected noises. His voice was gentle. "I've seen enough people running to recognize the signs." Pearl considered lying but found herself too weary for it. "A man. My late husband's brother. He became obsessed after William died, wouldn't take no for an answer. Mason's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "He hurt you," he tried. "I left Chicago before he could succeed." Pearl's voice was steady, betraying none of the fear that had driven her west. "But men like Harold don't give up easily, so I keep moving, staying alert." "You can't run forever," Mason said softly. "Watch me," Pearl replied, a spark of defiance in her eyes. The next morning, Mason announced he was well enough to continue his pursuit. Pearl told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was relief, not disappointment. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he said as he saddled the horse he'd recovered from where it had wandered after he was shot. Pearl handed him a package of food for his journey. "Try not to get yourself killed, Marshal Knox." He took the package, his fingers brushing hers. "I'll do my best." He hesitated. "Pearl, when this is finished, I'd like to come back, if that would be welcome." She stepped back, crossing her arms. "I don't make plans for the future, Marshal." "It's safer that way." "Mason," he corrected gently. "And sometimes Pearl's safety isn't living at all." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Thank you for saving my life. That's a debt I won't forget." Pearl watched him ride away, telling herself it was better this way. Attachments were dangerous. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. 2 weeks passed, and Pearl tried to return to her routine, tending her small garden, trading her handmade remedies in town for supplies, keeping to herself. But thoughts of Mason Knox intruded constantly. She found herself watching the road more often than necessary, scanning for a familiar figure on horseback. When riders did appear one afternoon, it wasn't Mason but 3 rough-looking men who approached her cabin with purpose in their stride. Pearl's heart raced as she reached for her pistol and stepped inside, closing the door firmly. A heavy knock came moments later. "Hello in the house. Looking for a woman who might have helped a wounded man recently?" Pearl remained silent, pistol ready. "We know you're in there, miss." "Just want to ask some questions about Marshal Knox." The name sent a chill through her. Had they killed him? "Were they here to eliminate a witness?" "I'm armed," she called out, steadying her voice. "And I have no answers for you." A different voice responded, smoother than the first. "Madam, we're not here to cause trouble. We're with the marshal's office, tracking the men who shot our colleague." "Show me your badges," Pearl demanded. "Hold them up to the window where I can see them." After a moment of muttered conversation, a badge was held up to her window. It looked official, but Pearl had learned caution the hard way. "Leave a message and go," she instructed. "If Marshal Knox returns, I'll pass it along." More muttering then. "Tell him we tracked the Colton gang to Rimrock Canyon. Deputy Wilson and Marshal Jennings are continuing pursuit." "He'll understand." The men eventually departed, and Pearl remained vigilant through the night, expecting a return, possibly an ambush. But the dawn came peacefully, and no one approached. 3 more days passed before hoofbeats again drew Pearl's attention. This time, she recognized the rider immediately, though his posture was slumped with exhaustion. Her heart leapt traitorously in her chest as she stepped onto the porch. Mason dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg. Blood had dried on his temple, and his clothes were filthy with dust and more blood, but his eyes lit up when they found her. "You're still here," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Where else would I be?" Pearl replied, moving forward to help him. "You look terrible." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You should see the other fellows. Did you find them? The bank robbers?" Mason nodded grimly. "Justice has been served, though not without cost." His expression darkened. "Lost a good deputy in the fight." Pearl helped him inside, noting how he leaned on her more heavily than his visible injuries seemed to warrant. "What aren't you telling me?" Once seated, Mason sighed and lifted his shirt to reveal a crude bandage soaked through with blood. "Knife. Slipped under my ribs during the struggle." Pearl's breath caught. "You rode all this way with that wound. Are you trying to die?" "No, madam," he replied seriously. "Just trying to get back to the only person I trust to patch me up proper." The admission hung between them as Pearl gathered her supplies. As she worked to clean and stitch his new wound, Mason watched her face with an intensity that made her hands tremble slightly. "Your deputies came by," she said to break the tension. Left a message about Rimrock Canyon, Mason nodded. I met up with them, it's over now. The last of the gang is either dead or in custody. So what now, Marshal? Back to chasing outlaws? He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about settling down, found a territory that suits me. Pearl tied off her stitching, not meeting his eyes. Most places need lawmen. You'll find work easy enough. That's not what I meant, Pearl. His hand captured hers, warm and calloused. I'm not talking about a place. She pulled away, busying herself with packing up her medical supplies. You don't know me, Mason, not really. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're brave and skilled. I know you've been hurt but haven't let it break you. I know when I rode away from here, all I could think about was coming back. Pearl stood abruptly. Don't, please. Mason respected her withdrawal, not pushing further that night. He slept on a pallet by the fire while Pearl again took the rocking chair, though sleep eluded her entirely. In the morning, they moved around each other carefully, the air heavy with unspoken words. Mason was clearly in pain but insisted on helping with chores, chopping wood despite Pearl's protests. You'll tear your stitches, she admonished. Worth it to feel useful, he replied, setting another log on the block. Pearl watched him, conflicted. Part of her wanted him to leave before she grew more attached. Another part feared exactly that. As if reading her thoughts, Mason set down the axe and turned to her. I'll be gone tomorrow if that's what you want. Just say the word. Pearl looked away. It's for the best. Is it? He stepped closer. Or is it just what feels safest? There's a difference. There is when safety becomes a cage. His voice was gentle. Pearl, whatever you're running from, we could face it together. She laughed bitterly. That's a pretty thought, Marshal. But men like Harold don't just give up because a woman finds another protector. I'm not offering to be your protector, Mason said firmly. You've proven you can protect yourself just fine. I'm offering to be your partner. The word struck Pearl with unexpected force. Partner. Not owner, not keeper. Equal. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. Mason instantly tensed, hand going to his gun. Get inside, he ordered, all warmth gone from his voice. Pearl obeyed but collected her rifle from above the door before peering through the window. 3 riders approached, but these weren't lawmen. She recognized the leader instantly and ice flooded her veins. Harold, she whispered. Mason glanced at her sharply. Your husband's brother. Pearl nodded, fingers tightening on her rifle. How did he find me? Doesn't matter now, Mason said grimly. Stay inside, I'll handle this. No, Pearl's voice was steel. This is my fight. Before Mason could argue, she stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. Mason flanked her, his hand hovering near his pistol. Harold Blackwood reined in his horse, a smile spreading across his handsome face that never reached his cold eyes. Pearl, my dear, what a chase you've led me on. I'm not your dear, Pearl replied evenly. And I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with you. Harold tusked as if scolding a child. Family doesn't abandon family, Pearl. You're my responsibility now that William is gone. She's not your anything, Mason interjected, his voice dangerously quiet. Harold's gaze shifted to Mason, taking in his stance and the badge visible on his vest. And who might you be? U.S. Marshal Mason Knox. You're trespassing on private property, mister, Harold laughed. Am I? This woman is my brother's widow. Any property of hers is rightfully under my supervision. That's not how the law works, Mason replied, and you know it. Harold's companions shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward their weapons. Pearl recognized the developing situation with growing dread. Harold, she said firmly. I left Chicago legally. I filed the proper documents. I am a free woman with my own property. There is nothing for you here. Nothing? Harold's expression darkened. You humiliated me, Pearl, running off like a thief in the night. What will people think? I don't care what people think, Pearl responded. Leave now, Harold. There's nothing for you here. Harold's eyes narrowed. I've traveled too far to leave empty-handed. The tension crackled between them until Mason broke it. Mr. Blackwood, I'm giving you one chance to turn around and ride out. After that, I'll be forced to arrest you for harassment and threatening a federal officer." For a moment, it seemed Harold might back down, then his hand flashed to his gun. Mason was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Harold cried out, his gun dropping as he clutched his shattered wrist. His companions reached for their weapons but froze when Pearl leveled her rifle at them. "Next one goes somewhere more permanent," Mason warned Harold. "Your choice." Blood dripping between his fingers, Harold glared at Pearl with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Pearl said firmly. "You'll find my lawyer delivered papers to your home before I left, legal documentation that I want nothing to do with you or the Blackwood estate. Signed by a judge and witnessed by the chief of police who, if you recall, never much liked you to begin with." Harold's face contorted with rage. "You can't," "She did," Mason interrupted. "Now, are you leaving or am I arresting you? Either way, you're going." The standoff ended with Harold and his men retreating, though the threat in Harold's eyes as he departed left Pearl shaken. Once they were out of sight, her knees nearly gave way. Mason was there instantly, his arm around her waist providing support. "He found me," she whispered. "And discovered you're not alone anymore," Mason replied. "Unless you want to be." Pearl looked up at him, seeing the question in his eyes. "He'll be back." "Probably," Mason agreed. "Men like that don't surrender easily." "And that doesn't concern you," Mason's mouth quirked up in a half-smile. "I've faced worse odds. Besides, I meant what I said. You don't need a protector, but everyone needs someone to stand with them." Pearl studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity there. "I've been alone a long time, Mason. I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "We can figure it out together," he said softly, "if you're willing to try." She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the warmth of him beside her, solid and real. When she opened them again, she'd made her decision. "I'm afraid," she whispered, vulnerability showing through her carefully constructed armor. "Of what?" he asked, though his eyes told her he already knew. "Of letting someone close again, of loving and losing." Her voice dropped even lower. "I'm afraid of love." Mason's hand gently tilted her chin up, his eyes holding hers. "You'll never fear mine," he promised. "Because mine will never try to cage you or own you. It will only ever stand beside you, supporting the strength you already have." Pearl felt something tight and painful in her chest begin to loosen for the first time in years. "That's a pretty speech, Marshal Knox." "Not just words," he assured her. "I'll prove it every day if you'll let me." The spring passed into summer and summer into fall. Pearl and Mason built a life together at the edge of White Rock, adding rooms to her cabin as their needs grew. Mason continued his work as a marshal, but arranged his territory to keep him closer to home. Pearl expanded her garden and began treating townspeople with her medical knowledge, eventually establishing a small infirmary with the doctor from the next town over. Harold made one more attempt to intimidate Pearl that winter, bringing more men and more threats. He found not only Mason waiting for him, but half the town as well, people who had come to respect the quiet woman who tended their injuries and the marshal who treated everyone fairly. Faced with a community united against him, Harold finally admitted defeat. Pearl received a letter from Chicago the following spring, informing her of Harold's death in a gambling dispute. She felt no joy at the news, only relief that the shadow over her life had finally lifted. On a warm evening in their second summer together, Mason and Pearl sat on their expanded porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Their hands were linked comfortably between their chairs, a casual intimacy that had become as natural as breathing. "Any regrets?" Mason asked, the question a continuation of a conversation they'd started earlier. Pearl considered this seriously, as she did all things. "Only that I waited so long to stop running." "You stopped when you were ready," Mason replied. "Not a moment before." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for that, for understanding I needed to choose this for myself. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. A comfortable silence settled between them as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Pearl said eventually. About the future, Mason turned to her, curious. What about it? The doctor in town is getting older. He's asked if I might consider taking over more of his practice. Is that something you want? Pearl nodded slowly. I think it is. Using what my father taught me to help people, it feels right. Then you should do it, Mason said simply. You'd be excellent. It would mean more responsibility, less time here at home. Mason's smile was gentle. Home will still be here, Pearl, so will I. The certainty in his voice warmed her. 2 years ago, she would have scoffed at such promises. Now she believed in them completely. There's something else, she said, her voice softer now. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. Mason went utterly still, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. Pearl, are you saying? She nodded, a smile breaking across her face. Come spring, there will be 3 of us. The joy that transformed Mason's features was something Pearl knew she would remember all her days. He knelt before her chair, both hands now cradling her still flat abdomen with reverence. A child, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Our child. Pearl covered his hands with hers. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He looked up at her, eyes shining. Are you afraid? She considered this, searching her heart for the fear that had been her constant companion for so long. There was nervousness, yes, anticipation and wonder and a healthy respect for the challenges ahead, but the paralyzing fear that had once defined her was absent. No, she realized aloud. I'm not afraid, not of this, not of us. Mason rose to kiss her, tender and reverent. I promised you'd never fear my love, he murmured against her lips. I intend to keep that promise every day of our lives. The child born the following spring was a daughter they named Hope, a testament to what they'd found in each other. She grew strong and fearless under the Montana sky, the first of 3 children who would fill their expanded home with laughter and occasionally tears. Pearl became the town's doctor, respected for her skill and compassion. Mason eventually hung up his badge to become the town's sheriff, preferring to stay close to his family. Together, they built not just a home but a community, turning White Rock from a frontier outpost into a thriving town where people looked out for one another. And on quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Pearl and Mason would sit together on their porch, hands linked. Watching the stars come out over the land, they both loved, a testament to what can grow when fear gives way to trust, and a whispered confession becomes a lifetime of promises kept.